Welcome to Coffee with Democrats, a sensible platform for progressive conversations. Coffee with Democrats is a grassroots movement dedicated to hearing from Democrats, candidates, legislators, and friends from all political backgrounds who want great conversations. Coffee with Democrats is committed to increase Democrat voter registration and Democrat voter turnout by making voting more exciting and meaningful. And now here's your host of Coffee with Democrats, Kevin Dawson. Friends from all political backgrounds.
Hey, good morning. Good morning. It's a wonderful day. The heat is on here in Oklahoma. It's going to be a miserable day to be outside without being properly hydrated. So we want to make sure that we give a little bit of a heads up to everybody about the heat here in Oklahoma and basically all over the South. So we're really excited today. We're going to be joined by two really awesome legislators from the state of Oklahoma, Andy Fugate and Amanda Swope. Amanda might be joining us a little bit later on, but she told me that she is planning on being here in just a little bit. So we're excited to have both of those folks with us. So welcome everybody to having this conversation and discussion. And good morning, Andy.
Good morning. It's good to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, it's kind of one of those days where I think my head is already spinning already today because the Supreme Court has just overturned the affirmative action for colleges, and this may have a lot of impact throughout our nation on affirmative action, even through businesses. I'm not sure how far this is going to go, but this is one of those taking steps backwards in the wrong direction for our nation, and it's going to put us in a really bad position here moving forward. So I'm just kind of just trying to figure this all out this morning, but this is similar to what happened with Roe v. Wade, which happened almost a year ago, a little over a year ago.
Kevin, to me, one of the most troubling pieces of this, absolutely, the sea change that we have in the rights of individuals under this Supreme Court. It's just horrifying, the things that are happening. But from a judicial kind of prudence perspective, the most troubling thing, I think, is the lack of any kind of what's the right way to reverence for stare decisis. The law has already been decided. This court seems to be willing to change at the drop of a hat or at a whim what has been settled law for 50 years or more. If you go back to the days of Brown versus Board of Education, which I hear my Republican colleagues talk about, we reversed the court. Yes, but there were 10 seminal decisions leading up to that over the course of 2 decades as the court built the framework for this is why this change is going to happen. You don't see any of that with this Supreme Court. You wake up one morning and all of a sudden 9 unelected people have decided the law is something else.
Correct.
It's a lousy way to run a republic, a constitutional republic, as my colleagues say. We're actually a democratically elected. That's another. Yeah, we won't go there.
Well, yeah, and I keep reminding all of everybody that I have interaction with. This is a democratic. This is a constitutional democratic republic. This is not just a constitutional republic, but this is also a constitutional democratic republic, and there's quite a reason for that. So I appreciate your comments and thank you for sharing those comments. We might back up just a little bit and have a little discussion here about your favorite coffee, because this is Coffee with Democrats, so we always have a little bit of a conversation about coffee.
So for me, I love supporting local coffee shops, and we have a terrific one right here in my district, Jitters Coffee. You will often find me there. It's my favorite place, not just for coffee, but to meet with constituents. It's located on Del City's Main Street, which, up until about 4 years ago, we actually didn't have a main street in Del City. But as we rebuilt the area around the Walmart that went in a decade ago, we decided we needed to have a main street, and that's where you'll find Jitters.
Well, that's excellent. What's your favorite coffee when you go there?
Me, I'm a real kind of boring coffee drinker. I just like a plain cup of. They have actually prefer their light roast, but sometimes they don't have that available, and so I'll just go with an Americano and just enjoy me a nice cup of coffee.
Right.
Little bit of French vanilla in it, and I'm good.
And I'm kind of well, I don't like the taste of coffee. I like coffee, don't get me wrong. I like coffee a lot, and I always have a cup of coffee in the morning and maybe 2 or 3 throughout the day, but I've never liked the taste of black coffee, so I've got to doctor it up. I've got to put a little pink sweetener in it, put a little bit of powdered creamer in it, and I'm golden with that. Just plain Jane, but just let's doctor the old blackness up so that it's a little bit easier to swallow for me anyway. That's my favorite. And so I want to make a couple of housekeeping announcements for those people who are on here. We're probably not going to be able to get to questions and answers from the audience today. The plan was to be able to have a if you would, please go ahead and put your questions down there. We will try to get to as many of those questions as we possibly can. So we will.
Kevin, I lost you there for about a minute. I don't know if it was on my end or yours.
Well, can you hear me now?
Crystal clear now.
Oh, good. When those things happen, it's always Elon Musk's fault. We blame it entirely on Elon. This is, his platform. He can't get it right, but we're sticking with it because the fact is, it seemed like in 2016 the Democrats moved away from Facebook, and we seen what happened then. And we moved over to Twitter in 2020, and we've seen what happened there. And I don't want to give up and surrender any platform at this point. I want to make them kick me off of the platform before I'm going to move on somewhere else. I really think that it's important for us to keep our voice and make sure, even though that this is turning into kind of that red stain within the social media world, I want to keep that blue dot atmosphere going and keep people in a positive attitude about Twitter and Twitter Spaces. Go ahead. You were getting ready to say something.
Well, I was just going to mention that, who knows how long the technology will still be stable. I'm an old technology guy, and we can talk about that later. But the notion that he has fired all of his senior folks who were in charge of infrastructure and network administration, et cetera, the folks who actually know how all the stuff works, is just terrifying. And we've seen, these major outages that they have and pieces that are fundamentally broken, two-factor authentication. And we have this situation where they tried to do the launch of a very high-profile presidential candidate that was just a complete disaster.
Right.
Yeah. Who knows how long Twitter will continue to be up and running and stable.
Right. Yeah. I want to change topics just for a little bit here. This is the 29th day of Pride Month. We had a lot of really outstanding events that took place. We had a Pride Parade here in Norman, and your fellow colleague, Representative Rosecrans, was one of the marshals for that parade, and it was very well attended here in Norman. Up in Oklahoma City, they also had a Pride event earlier this month. Tulsa had theirs, I believe it was last weekend. Even though the storms had come through, they were still able to successfully have their Pride Parade. So it's really interesting, that the world has changed. The world in which I grew up, which was a segregated South, I've embraced diversity in my life. As an HR manager with a major railroad, it became that innate feeling that I wanted to embrace all the people that we have out there. You know, the fact that, you know, I had an uncle who was gay, but, you know, in our family, we didn't talk about it. He was closeted. He lived down in Yuma, Arizona with his partner. And, and the fact that he was just basically ostracized or, you know, put aside by the family because of his, what they said was his choice. I'm beginning to believe, in my own opinion, that it's not always a choice, that people are born that way. And there are factors for that. So, but the bottom line is love. People are people. Treat everybody with respect. Go back to the golden rule. Treat your neighbor as yourself. That's where I'm at, and that's where I want to continue to go with that. And we can talk a little bit about. I put a link out there on onto the little Q&A that I sent to you about the LGBTQ map and the equality that's taken place within Oklahoma. You can actually see the disparity in Oklahoma compared to other states and how poorly we're ranked when it comes to LGBTQ rights and privileges. So it's out there. I'll try to, if I can figure out how to put it up in the nest, I'll put it up in the nest. But if anybody's interested, just go to www.lgbtmap.org and look up the equality maps and the profile for each state that you're in, because it really is an eye-opening experience. So Andy, let's talk a little bit about you. From birth through high school, who was Andy Fugate?
Shy, reserved, introverted.
Where were you born and where did you grow up? Give me a little bit about your family dynamics. I know a little bit about your history, but I want to go ahead and let you explain it, because you're such a fantastic person that represents a certain demographic.
Well, thank you. So Dad was in the United States Air Force, 20 years Air Force, you know, went all over the place. Met my mom in Japan. Mom's Japanese, so I'm mixed race heritage. And when I was 10 years old, Dad retired here at Tinker Air Force Base. We lived for a short period of time in Moore, and so I started out attending Moore public schools here. First real taste of racism actually happened right here in Moore public schools on the playground with a kid that, and we don't need to go into all the details, but, you know, growing up military, living on military bases, was just a complete different world than, you know, when I came here. And,
right.
And I don't decry where I live, but, you know, it was just different.
You know, we hear, I'm going to stay within the same topic, but I'm going to kind of add a little dynamic. Today we hear Governor DeSantis, Governor Stitt, we've got the governor over in Arkansas. We've got all these senators, Ted Cruz, and all these people talking about woke and wokeism throughout the United States. And when you look at the history of our armed services, the armed services that you grew up in, it's probably the most woke institution that we've had for decades. This isn't new. It's, you know, you look at how, I believe it was Eisenhower who completely integrated the military after World War II. But, you know, you look at the units, how they were integrated during World War II. So it's you know, we've come a long way, and it's something that I think we need to embrace, the fact that diversity has been around for a long, long time.
Yeah, you know, it's worth noting that the misogyny, sorry, which is mixed race marriages, was not legal in the state of Oklahoma until 1969. That's after so it's within my own lifetime,
right?
That mixed race marriages were permitted by law here in Oklahoma. So, you know, and it was just this past year in the legislature where we finally got rid of the last vestiges of redlining and racial covenants and in real estate law.
Right.
And so, all my colleagues, and I held my colleague, John Pfeiffer's feet to the fire on the floor of the House as we were debating this bill. What would you call it if you're not allowed to live someplace? If the rules are set up, is that a system by which, somebody might be oppressed? And bless his heart, I never could get him to actually admit that, yes, in Oklahoma, we had systemic racism.
Right.
We have a state that is founded on systemic racism. We had, tribal nations that were brought here, not of their own free will, forced to live here, put aside in specific reservations. When we finally became a state, the very first law that we put into place was Jim Crow. Senate Bill number 1. We had our first elected Black legislator who was elected in the very first legislature, and one of the first actions after this passage of Jim Crow was to gerrymander his district so he was unelectable 2 years later.
Right. Yeah, that's unfortunate that Oklahoma was founded during that time in 1907, right during the height of Jim Crow, and you know what? We're going to continue to feel the collateral damage from that. We're going to continue to feel that for generations and generations. But the good thing is, what we're seeing with the newer generations that are coming up, they have no interest in maintaining that and keeping it, or at least the degree has declined significantly among those people who are coming out of high school right now. So there is hope that we're going to be able to make great strides to get rid of the rest of the vestiges of racism. And it's such a stain on the United States. We talk about original sins, and the original sin of slavery, but the offshoot of slavery is racism, and we've got to continue to tear down the walls on that, in my opinion.
Hey, I want to say one other thing too about woke.
Yeah, please.
And just pure and simple, woke is a euphemism,
yes,
for racial bigotry.
Yeah.
All the other stuff that they try to put under the, CRT and SEL and, the whole alphabet soup thing. But the bottom line is, it is all about bigotry.
Right.
And feeling comfortable with your own biases and hatred of other people. And so shame on them for being so open with what's absolutely detestable.
Right. And using woke, which was a word that was, about being alert to the racism, is now it's now being used in replace of, when I grew up, the most harsh word that you would hear about another race was the N-word. And I think today woke should be the 4-letter word that if you use it, you reflect everything that it stands against.
Yeah. This whole kind of co-opting of language,
right.
It really is Orwell's Newspeak.
Yes.
We're going to take things that are good and we're going to, make them reflect exactly the opposite.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about Andy Fugate's college, university, and post-high school education. Give us a little bit of a background on that.
So graduated from Del City High School in 1984, was, among other things, was class valedictorian, which was at a time when we didn't have 45 of them. We had 3 out of a class of, almost 450 students there. So, and one of the things I did for myself was make music. I was part of a very, very successful jazz program with a number of my classmates who went on to play professionally all over the world. And so college for me was initially OU, and then a transfer over to back then Central State, where I completed my degree in computer science, paying for my schooling with my trombone. I continue to play that today. But that's it was my career and my study in school was primarily focused on computer technology.
And that's where, so if we go beyond the college, that was the field of your profession after college, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I spent 30 plus years leading technology for companies. When I graduated from college, I spent 5 months working for the Oklahoman as the most junior programmer there, but then got a call from the company I'd worked for when I was in college, who had asked me to return. They were restructuring company and wanted me to lead their technology department there. And so I stepped into that corporate leadership role, and I've served as VP of technology, and I've served as product evangelist, cloud computing, mobile technology, software development teams, product management, enterprise projects, runs the gamut. I've probably led teams in that, and I have been blessed all along the way to work with terrific people. So.
That's wonderful about, your technology, and you took that passion from your youth and you brought it out as an adult. Let's talk a little bit about your early political life. When you got out of high school, got out of college, you started in your profession. This part of your life, I think, is something that might shock some of the people listening.
Well, it's kind of funny. I'm trying to decide what my early political life might consist of, since for me, my actual, kind of deep involvement in politics, unlike a number of electeds, really was not party related or anything along those lines. You could say that my political life started 5 years ago when I got elected.
Okay.
but there is a side note to that, in that when I was at Del City High School, I had 2 opportunities to go to Washington, D.C. And spend a week, both my junior year and then my senior year, attending a program called Close Up. And the idea is to take the common ordinary kid off the street and give them a detailed look from the inside of what was going on at the national level, talking to the movers and shakers, and really just a remarkable, life-changing experience for me. And when I got back home, one of the 2 teachers that had brought me to DC said, "We do something similar in Oklahoma. We do it one time a year, not 48 weeks out of the year. Would you be interested in working with our program?" And I said, "Absolutely, absolutely." And so I spent, again, 30 plus years. Well, from 1985 until I was elected in 2018, I spent every year working with high school kids at the state capitol as a volunteer, teaching them about the process, the issues going on, the people who are involved, helping them get connected, whether it's connected to a governor or to a speaker. Or I have this picture, and I've got to find it in my archives here, but it's a picture of me much, much younger with then Speaker Glenn Johnson. Glenn was the youngest speaker, House Speaker in the United States at the time. I'm in my early 20s back then. And we recapped that picture just 2 years ago when he finally retired as the chancellor for the state of Oklahoma. 2 of us right there on the floor of the House, and it was because of my involvement in Oklahoma Close Up. So I am passionate about the processes that we have out there, how stuff works, how it ought to work, and helping people understand that.
That's wonderful. And then you ran for office, you said in 2018.
Correct.
Okay. And that was for the current position that you're in right now.
Yeah. So my predecessor, Scott Inman, who was the minority caucus leader, the Democrats at the time, reached out to me as he was getting in 2016 and said, this is my last hurrah. You ought to run for my seat. And I told him no, wasn't interested, wasn't me, not a public speaker. And he worked on me for several weeks, and he came back finally and he said to me, Andy, you need to take what you have learned at the Capitol and make a difference for your community, which is, and Scott knew this. This is what I always told the kids at the end of the program. Scott was in close up with me. As a matter of fact, when Scott was in high school, he was part of my own group as a student, as part of the close up program. And then we served together for a decade and a half as volunteers. So, I told him it was dirty pool to use a guy's words against him.
Right, right.
But I went home, talked it over with my wife, prayed about it. And about a week later said, yeah, let's do this. And so.
And that's wonderful. You took what you learned as in your younger years and you applied it. Tell us a little bit about your district. What district do you represent?
So I represent District 94, which is the entirety of Del City, and then west of Del City going all the way out to I-35. And Del City is actually just a 2-mile wide corridor. So if you take that 2-mile wide corridor on the west side of Tinker and you go all the way south to 89th Street, that's my district. So
Okay.
all contained within Oklahoma County. And
about what the population that you represent, what would that consist of?
Each of us in the House represents not quite 40,000 people.
Okay. So moving on from your representation there, let's talk a little bit about some of the current events at 10:30. I wanted to try to start focusing in on a little bit more about the current events that have happened this week. And let's start with the Byrd audit. Cindy Byrd, she completed an audit of the fiscal year 2021 and years around that. And she came up with some pretty damning information to share with the public. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that Cindy Byrd audit?
Yeah, I'll start with the probably the adjective for me that it's jaw dropping. So, as you mentioned, this is an audit of the $14 billion that the state of Oklahoma received that were required to go through a compliance audit. And that was for the fiscal year 2021, which ran from June 2020 or July 2020 to June 2021. And it doesn't include all of the federal dollars. There are some that go through Department of Commerce and, ag and some other places, but the vast majority of the federal dollars were reviewed, not for malfeasance particularly. This really is an audit focused on, did we comply with the federal guidelines about how these dollars are supposed to be spent and administered? And out of the $14 billion, I'm proud to say, for those who are involved at the state level, 13 billion and 999 million, whatever the number is, passed the compliance side of it. There's $29 million though that wound up in the ditch, and of that $29 million, $8 million went through the hands of the governor's office and one particular individual, our current superintendent of public instruction, Ryan Walters. And it's jaw dropping, the level of lack of compliance, the cavalier attitude about basic things like record keeping, the preferential treatment for those who were favored by the governor, and Ryan Walters, who had his own network of people that it very clearly he was trying to benefit. It's horrifying. So
right, and it's to such a degree that even the current House Speaker, Republican Charles McCall, even made a statement where he says, after a cursory review of Audit Bird's report, I find her conclusions to be extremely troubling for our state and for the hardworking taxpayers of Oklahoma. And to me, if that's not sufficient reason to start a impeachment procedure and start the articles of impeachment for the governor and for the superintendent, I don't know what would be. I mean, unless they committed murder, this is like committing armed robbery.
It's funny that you used murder. So I've had folks reach out to me and say, well, you know, Andy, is impeachment really appropriate here? Because this happened before he was elected as Superintendent of Public Instruction. And my answer is absolutely. You know, impeachment is not a legal process. Impeachment is a political process, impeachment
Correct.
and removal. And if we had, for instance, a governor, and we discovered that prior to election, that governor had murdered somebody 8 years in the past, right? We absolutely could impeach that governor and remove that governor, even though that didn't happen when they were in office.
Right.
But it's certainly something that's egregious enough that people said, you know what, this person should not be in charge of running, this major portion of Oklahoma, in the case of Ryan Walters, education.
Yeah, and we can see the malfeasance that he has goes beyond just this audit, but we are hearing daily about how he is cherry picking particular grant money from the federal government, grant money that will help underprivileged children with disabilities, and he's cherry picking and not applying for those because he says that they don't meet the values, because that might be something in there about another religion or affirmative care or affirmative action. We're seeing him cherry pick that, much the same as what they've done in Mississippi. And you can see what's happened in Mississippi, but the fact is we rank worse than Mississippi on education right now.
Yeah. And I keep hearing the superintendent say that he took over a dumpster fire from Joy Hoffmeister, took over a dumpster fire. You know, I can't tell you how many times I heard that when he was testifying before the Appropriations and Budget Committee at the Capitol. And the reality is nearly $1 billion of that $14 billion was administered by the State Department of Education. None of it was questioned. Right. Not $0 of it were questioned. And that includes the $8 million of the governor's money. So the governor, as part of this whole process, actually received not quite $40 million. They carved it up into 5 pieces, and one of those 5 pieces went to the State Department of Education, $8 million. And that passed the compliance audit with flying colors. It was the rest of the money that the governor had administered by Ryan Walters that, was the dumpster fire.
Right.
And now that dumpster fire has expanded to the entirety of that agency.
And we've seen a mass resignation out of the Oklahoma Department of Education. Almost the entire grant department has resigned. Everybody who has institutional knowledge is gone.
Yeah, and he's hired now somebody who's coming in supposedly to lead the grants operation over there, who's not been a superintendent or had educational experience here in the state of Oklahoma. So we'll see whether or not they're going to be effective or not in that process.
And that's the gentleman from Texas.
There's a lady.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misspoke.
She was a former candidate for office. You should go look at at her goofy advertising.
Right, and we're seeing this bigotry that's starting to infect he's bringing in these people that perpetuate this bigotry is basically what I see out of it.
Absolutely. Yep.
And in all reality, based on the decision from the Supreme Court today, based on the leadership that we have in the state of Oklahoma, and the guy that we've got in charge of our Superintendent of Public Education Instruction, we're seeing the actual, I don't want to say this is the beginning of it, but we're seeing the activation of Jim Crow 2.0.
Yeah, we are seeing the dismantling of all the protections that have been put into place over decades and decades, jurisprudence and statutory changes, all of that's being dismantled. And, something as basic as having integrated and open schools, educating all the kids of the state of Oklahoma. Well, no, we're going to take money and we're going to put it inside those ivory tower walls and fund the kids who've already been able to make it in there.
Right. We're going to fund the wealthy. We're going to give wealthy welfare in order to, and if you can't afford it, your kids are going to go without.
Yeah, take what you just said and shorten it just a hair and call it wealth fare, because that's what it is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right. So the complete audit is 250 pages, and I don't know if I can get that put up into the nest or not, but I'll have a link that I'll put onto this Twitter space. I'll put it down below so that whenever we get off here today, people can still access both the 250-page audit as well as the 5-page audit summary. And just by perusing through the 20 Democrat representatives and their social media, to every single one of them is astounded by this report. There is nobody in this that is a representative who's surprised by it, but at the same time, they're just every single one to a T has said this is unacceptable, and we need to follow up on it. The next thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about with you is the decision by the 10th Circuit, the decision of Hopper versus the city of Tulsa, which seems to be in line with this dismantling of the can't remember the term now, but the tribal sovereignty that Oklahoma Native Americans enjoy, and the attack by our governor and other legislators who want to do away with that, and we had this 10th Circuit decision. Basically, it was a person over in Tulsa who was speeding, was pulled over, given a citation. There's the Republican side of it says he never paid anything. Well, in fact, he did pay his fine, but he's gone back to court and asked for reimbursement because this happened on tribal lands. And if anybody knows, the counties in eastern and south central Oklahoma, south of Canadian County, are almost all in tribal sovereign land, and we've got a circumstance here where we're continuing to have these court decisions, and the most striking one was the Supreme Court decision a few years ago that actually said that it affirmed that the Native Americans have sovereignty over their land. So you want to talk a little bit about Hopper versus the city of Tulsa and the comments from our governor?
Well, I could talk a little bit about it. This is a point where I wish Amanda Swope, Representative Swope from Tulsa, were on, because she spent a significant portion of her career involved in some of these issues. But I can tell you that Oklahoma is unique. We have more recognized, federally recognized tribes than any other state in the United States. You know, 1 in 7, 1 in 6, Oklahomans has tribal association as a tribal citizen. And it's a healthy, vibrant ecosphere here in Oklahoma. Some of the best things that are happening in this state are being done by tribal nations who are rebuilding rural Oklahoma. Thank God somebody is. The issue in Tulsa, I don't understand why we cannot put together a cross-deputization process. So since about 2006, there's been a base cross-deputization that says if you're on tribal land, you're still allowed to arrest somebody, you're allowed to investigate, and vice versa. You know, for tribal officers coming off of, it's the same kind of cross-deputization that's used for sheriffs. You know, as they're doing county-related work inside municipal boundaries, etc. There are rules about when they can do it, when they can't, etc. But to me, that seems like that kind of process would be, if they don't already have it in place, would be the answer, as opposed to what the governor's doing and trying to assert his own authority in a place where the Supreme Court has already said, sorry, you don't have it. Come up with Plan B.
Right, right. And he continues to attack their sovereignty because to me, that's the war that he wants to wage. Is he wants to be in control of everybody's life in Oklahoma, when in fact the Supreme Court and federal government have said and reaffirmed for years that Native Americans who have been displaced from their lands based on treaty, these are federal treaties, and displaced and brought to Oklahoma, will have sovereignty over their land. They will have these treaties have given them the property and their own ability to self-govern. So it's kind of interesting, that we have somebody that wants to go to war with established law. Again, what you and I talked about earlier, where we're seeing people attack established law just like the Supreme Court did.
It boils down to one word, and you used it, and that is control.
Right.
Everything about this particular administration, this particular governor, is all about control from one particular individual, himself. And that's not the way democracy works. It's not the way constitutional republic works, quite frankly. But, right. Democratically elected constitutional republics, we elect those people to make government work for everybody, right? We don't elect kings. We don't elect tyrants who say that, I'm going to replace you if you just don't absolutely do my will. Everything about this governor is all about control from one person, himself.
Right. And it goes back, you and I were in Tulsa together at the Democratic Convention. We sat through a session with David Pepper, and David Pepper wrote a couple of really excellent books about democracy. But one of the things the topics that he brought up that is kind of talking about this same situation that you and I are talking about right now is authoritarianism, and how the governor of the state of Oklahoma, just like former President Trump and the governor down in Texas, you just point to any Republican governor in the United States, and they want to have this authoritarian regime. So it's kind of interesting to we're living in that environment here in Oklahoma, where we've got a governor who wants to have that, like you said, control. Like I said earlier, control. But well, Andy, this has been a very good conversation today. I want to bring up, or excuse me, I want to ask you: is there other topics that we haven't discussed that really we're dropping the ball on, that we need to talk about?
Boy, that's a good question. There are a number of things that are happening still at the Capitol. People think that when the legislature is done with session, that we're done. We're supposed to be part-time legislators, but the reality is, for many of us, this is a full-time calling. We still have a special session going right now. We have two. So, as part of what was going on at the state, and this kind of speaks to this whole control and distrust of the governor, and we called ourselves into a special session to work on the budget, frankly, because my Republican colleagues couldn't do the one thing the Constitution says we're supposed to do, and that's to create a balanced budget for the people of Oklahoma. Right. They continue to wage war on each other until the very last minute. And so we were at risk of producing a budget in the last week of session that would be at the mercy of the governor being able to do a veto, because the Constitution says we have to finish our session by the last Friday in May at 5 p.m. So if we send a budget to the governor in the last week and the governor decides he doesn't like pieces of it, he can veto whatever he wants to.
I don't know.
And there's nothing we could do.
Microphone is cutting out, or whether it's Andy's that's cutting out.
It might be me wandering around. So
no, I can hear you, Andy. This is Steve. I can hear you just fine.
Okay.
Want to continue?
So the legislature, in an effort, because we didn't trust the governor, quite honestly, that's just it, plain and simple, decided to do a special session devoted to budgetary issues and pass all of the budget related bills in that. Well, the governor has vetoed two of those. Again, waging war on the tribes. Kevin said it earlier, and it's a good choice of words, or sad state of affairs, whichever way you want to look at it. But the two are related to tribal compacts, where the tribes have agreements with the state of Oklahoma to collect taxes for tobacco product sales and for motor vehicle registrations. Now, they're not required to collect those taxes on tribal citizens. I mean, tribal citizens could drive around their vehicles for free, but they choose to do that, and they keep a portion of what they charge for vehicle registration, and the same for tobacco taxes. The governor vetoed two bills that would extend those tribal compacts just by 1 year. And so what we have in place today would continue for another year. And the governor said, well, I want to renegotiate those compacts. And so you're taking away my authority to do that. And so I think he believes he would have additional leverage with the tribes if if we ended the compacts this year instead of next year at December. But the reality is, if we ended it now and he didn't have anything negotiated, well, they would just stop collecting taxes on their own tribal citizens. How is that good for the people of Oklahoma? And I think we have seen with this governor's complete disasters in negotiations, Panasonic, Volkswagen, Canoe. The one win he's had from a business development perspective was Enel, the company is going to build solar panels up in Tulsa area of Oklahoma. They've been in this state for over a decade. They came to the state of Oklahoma and said, we have another offer from another state, but we would rather stay here and build this. If you will just match what they're offering us, we'll stay here, we'll build here. That's the only thing he was able to get done. All these other negotiations have just been nonsense, complete losses for the people of Oklahoma. And now he wants to sit back and negotiate with the tribes like he's some master negotiator. Please.
Andy, this is Steve. When I read news stories about the Republican Party in Oklahoma at this point, I don't. Is it fractionating? Is this going to be something that you're seeing, at the ground level and seeing in the legislature? Is it going to be something that affects the primaries? Are people going to, maybe still, if they are have an R by their name in terms of voting? Are they going to, consider more alternatives? I mean, we've been told in the past about how the Republicans were in lockstep, and now what we're seeing is there's all this infighting, which you referred to, that's going on. And what is the effect of that, other than we've got some terrible governance going on by the Republican Party in power?
There's an old saying at the Capitol that any old jackass can kick down a barn. It takes a good carpenter to build one.
Yeah.
And we need to start electing more carpenters. But the problem we have right now is in the primary process we have in Oklahoma. The primaries are controlled by party extremists. And in the last election cycle, of the 125 legislative seats that were up for re-election, 87 of us did not make it to November, either because we didn't have a challenger. There were 31 of us, and I'm one of those, or there were 56 others where the decision was made in a primary. And primary turnouts are low. It's generally the zealots within a particular party. And so that's what you wind up with at the Capitol, is a whole lot of zealotry, and not folks who are actually interested in the serious work of governing. And it does cause those fractions that you're talking about. I'll say this: there has almost anytime there's been a super majority in control, you see those kinds of divisions, and whether it's rural or urban, or agriculture versus oil. So there's a historic precedent for some of that. But what's driving the difference now is this extremism. That is, as these extremists continue to get elected, oftentimes because they're unopposed. Kevin mentioned David Pepper, and I'm really persuaded by his belief, David Pepper's, that we need to challenge everywhere, all elections, so that we have an opportunity to press back on some of this extremism. And granted, in Oklahoma, it's a very difficult proposition in so many places to even say that you're a Democrat, much less run as a Democrat. So I get that, but we absolutely need to be, finding ways to navigate and put thoughtful people on the ballot at all levels, especially at the lowest. We need to build a bench.
That's an excellent point. And I'm just dreaming here, but I know that there are some states that have, I believe, banned, primaries, restricting, other parties to be able to vote. So in the Republican primary, you can't have Democrats voting in that, and vice versa. But some states, I believe, either by popular initiative or whatever, have actually completely done away with that. And I wonder if that's something that you've kind of thought about and might be a consideration for perhaps a grassroots initiative in Oklahoma.
Well, grassroots is probably how we're going to have to get it done. I've run election legislation every year I've been at the Capitol. This year, I ran several election-related bills, one of which said if your primary is a closed primary, it is not a people process, it's a party process, and so the party has to pay for the cost of it. And you cannot schedule it on a day where we have a state or federal election. So take your party process and do it whenever you want to do it. Pay for it yourself if you want to have people vote, or frankly, go back to what they've done, what they do in other states where they don't vote. They just use a caucusing process, and that's fine too. I couldn't get that one heard. I had a bill that would advance the top two vote getters in a single race primary or a single party race, so that you have, so many races here in Oklahoma, two Republicans who wind up in a runoff, and a handful of people in the district get a chance to vote. Well, under the change that I requested, those top two people would advance to November, and they would have to appeal to everybody in that district. I don't know that we'll ever get rid of, the closed primary entirely, but there are certainly ways for us to kind of navigate forward. Love to see us do ranked choice voting, but that's going to take a while.
and come back to your point about we've got to have Democrats running for these offices and not allow these freebie elections for Republicans, notwithstanding gerrymandering. I made the point last week, and we see a lot of good things that Gettner's doing. But nonetheless, there was no Democrat that ran for the Attorney General's office this last election cycle, which to me, being born and raised in Oklahoma is almost, and maybe I'm to blame too. I'm an attorney. I could have run for it, technically. And I'm not saying that I'm going to, but I'm just saying among the whole state that there wasn't at least one Democrat lawyer who would run for that office and at least, make a go at it. We just can't have that anymore.
I mean, in fairness, running for office is hard. It's hard on the candidate. It's hard on their family, the kinds of things that people say, the kind of attacks that happen. And ultimately, in the end, if you don't win, it's pretty defeating because it's effectively a popularity contest. In 2018, the year I was elected, we had a candidate who was running against an entrenched incumbent and ran a terrific race, lost 60-40. But in that particular race, that's actually doing well. But he couldn't come to terms with his loss, and he committed suicide 6 months later. Horrific ending. And so I struggle with that. Yeah, I want to have people running in every single race, but I don't want to just have somebody put their name on a ballot and get attacked and go through all the hell that candidates and electeds are subject to. So.
Well, I don't disagree with you at all. And I've run for an office, not at your level. I've run for a district attorney position very hard about 20 years ago. And it's great sacrifices. There are those of us, that keep an attitude of, you find out who your friends are. One door closes and maybe one or two other doors open. And it's just, you're willing to risk relationships in order to, of course, stand on your opinions and your beliefs. And that I came out of that race and I lost it kind of like you're talking about, kind of a 60-40 to an entrenched incumbent who's a district attorney up here at the time. And so what I want to do is I just want to encourage those who, have any interest in doing so to run for offices and know that here on Coffee with Democrats, we're going to provide whatever support we can in doing so. But the point you make is of course a perfect point, that it's such a challenge and difficulty to run. And thank you for doing what you do and, the sacrifices that you and your family make in doing so.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I will encourage all of those who are interested. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to visit with you about the process. Because I love to teach, and we'll try to get you started in whatever way. For those, and I'm going to share a success here in my district. Del City, Oklahoma, is a very conservative district, and vote Donald Trump, and that I had so many folks tell me I'm the only Democrat they ever voted for or would vote for, But now on our city council, we have 4 members plus the mayor, and half, so 2 of the 4 are Democrats. One's a progressive Democrat who beat a seated incumbent who was a stalwart in the community, and she did it the way Democrats do. She knocked doors, she talked to people, and she said, I need your vote. For her, it was on Valentine's Day. I would love to have your vote this Valentine's Day. And she did it.
That's a great story.
And that's, I think we start by building a base of sane, sensible people. And people are going to look around and say, oh, look, we got 2 Democrats on the city council here in Oklahoma. We didn't turn into San Francisco. Not only that, but things are improving here in Del City. Maybe it's not so bad having Democrats. I think that's certainly,
and it's certainly helped by the turmoil that we see with Stitt, and which, coming back to that just briefly, it's almost as if there's a lot of comments about fascism in this day, and rightly so regarding DeSantis, but it's like with Stitt, he's weaving in a kind of old manifest destiny point that he's trying to make. And of course, then we live in this era where the funding comes from so many sources outside of the state that you kind of begin to wonder, and I think this is the point you've been making, I mean, is the governor representing the people of Oklahoma, or is he representing some other interest, hidden or otherwise?
Well, I think very clearly he's representing a small subset of Oklahoma, and that's primarily his donor base. You see it in things like the private school voucher piece that he put together. You know, over a course of 5 years, which is the length of the proposal for Panasonic, which the governor said was historic and life-changing and, you know, huge, this largest investment by the people of Oklahoma, right? Well, that was $947 million, not quite $1 billion over 5 years. Do you know what the 5-year cost is going to be for private school vouchers? $1.1 billion.
Oh, man.
$153 million more than what the governor said was the most life-changing, historic, you know, huge, enormous expenditure. I go back to 2015 and 2016 when the legislature ran into financial problems after the tax cuts they had in 2012. And at that time, they were looking at all of the state's expenditures, and they were concerned about wind energy. You know, we heard about how wind energy was going to bankrupt the state of Oklahoma because we had these tax credits for them. Do you know the amount of those tax credits at that time? $80 million. They were projected to rise as high as $200 million. And they said, absolutely, we've got to staunch the blood flow. We have to, you know, get rid of these tax credits because they're blowing a hole in our budget. And today, what we're going to have is an annual hole in the budget of $250 million going to ultra wealthy families who donated to Kevin Stitt.
Well,
it's outrageous.
Yeah, it is outrageous. And I hate to end on, for us to end on that kind of note, but I'll just say this. Kevin, he had some technical difficulties, so he had to bow out. I'm going to go ahead and say, Andy, is there anything else you'd like to add in here before we wrap up this session? And again, want to thank you for coming on and providing your contribution today.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here. You guys are doing some outstanding work, helping to kind of carry the torch, spread the message, not just here in Oklahoma, but spreading across the United States, which is just awesome. And so kudos to you guys. And, you know, we were having a conversation. The caucus has been meeting the last 2 days. And the difference, I think, between the two parties, fundamental difference, is that Republicans are interested in their donors, and it's very clear in their policies and the things that they do. And the Democrats in Oklahoma are interested in people.
Yeah. Well, and kudos to Kevin Dawson for really, you know, taking this and spreading this nationally. He's had wonderful people such as yourself here within the state of Oklahoma, but also outside of the state that are coming on. And we all just kind of feel like it helps in different ways. It's kind of invisible and hard to see how that is, but there seems to be some good spirits being raised, and letting people know, especially in rural America, that, you know, there's hope. Even like there's hope here in Pawhuska, where I am, as rural as you can get in Oklahoma, and there's even more rural, perhaps, than that in Oklahoma. So thank you for your comments, and Kevin, of course, will be back here next week and have another fantastic guest, and we'll take it from there. So you all have a great day.
Thank you. Delighted to be here anytime.
Okay, bye-bye.